Welcome back, everyone. Welcome to the wide receiver video for the rankings. This is probably going to be the longest one yet, so grab your popcorn, grab your dick, whatever you got to grab. I hope you guys enjoy. This was definitely the hardest one to make, too. There's so many receivers on every team. It's very hard to put them together for ranking them. Overall, it'll be kind of the same thing as quarterbacks, where up to 4 is where I'll primarily be ranking the teams based off of their receivers, but anything after that is just kind of brownie points for how good their depth chart is. But overall, the receivers should go up to about 4. But if you have 4 really good ones or 4 mid ones, it might be better than having like 1 really good one and 3 dog shit ones, for example. But overall, up to 4, there's so many spots you can put your receivers in, so the teams that have more consistent ones will probably be ranked higher. And let's get right into it. At number 12, to a surprise to Jesus Christ himself, we have Scrambled and Wiggle Waggled. All right, in last place, A.J. Brown, DK Metcalf, Darnell Mooney, Rashim Shaheed. Okay, so besides having a terrorist that probably committed 9/11 at your 4th wide receiver, A.J. Brown is a good receiver, very good receiver to have. I think he's getting taken way too early compared to other receivers, though. I think you can get a few guys after him that were probably going to do better than Brown this year. I think Brown's due to fall back a little bit compared to how good he did last year. I think last year was his peak, but he should still do really good. And actually, I just realized he doesn't have DK Metcalf. He has Tyler Lockett. That's on my mistake. He actually has Tyler Lockett, who I think is going to have a down year compared to how good he usually does, because they are getting Jackson Smith-Njigba, who is supposed to be one of the best receivers in the 2023 draft. I think Tyler Lockett might take a step back. It might not be a big one, but overall, these receivers in comparison to a lot of the other receivers, I don't think are going to be that good. I like A.J. Brown, like I said, but I think he's too late or too early of a pick. Darnell Mooney is a Bears fan. Between field scrambling, us having 45 running backs, getting Claypool, even though he sucks, getting DJ Moore, I don't see Darnell Mooney being fantasy reliable. He might have a few games where he does pretty good. That's usually how he does, but I would not rely on him. And then, to be honest, I have never heard of Rashim Shaheed. He might be doing kick returns or something. I don't know why his projections are so high. But, yeah, I'm not going to lie. Let me see who all's on your bench. Yeah, your team is just a team, to be honest. You're definitely last place when it comes to receivers, though. Let's scramble our way into number 11, which is where we actually have Toxic Zenpai. Now, Toxic Zenpai has Davante Adams, Mike Williams, Jacoby Myers, Courtland Sutton, Michael Gallup. He also has Jalen Reed and I believe McCole Hardman. Yep. So, regardless of the fact that Hardman is a very good last name, the best last name one could have, on a serious note, Davante Adams, I think he'll have another really good year. I think he'll be one of the best receivers. He might have a bit of a downgrade with Jimmy Garoppolo at quarterback. I don't think so, though. He's played with bad quarterbacks before. I think he'll do good, just like he usually does. I don't know why he fell so late in a lot of drafts. Mike Williams is high risk, high reward. If he can stay healthy, he could be a huge pickup for Toxic here. But in comparison to a lot of the other players in the league, him being a wide receiver too, probably isn't going to be that great from a fantasy perspective, especially if he has that much of a risk of getting hurt. Plus, they brought in Quentin Johnston. So, overall, I don't think Williams is going to be that phenomenal. Jacoby Myers, he's now on the Raiders receiving core with Davante Adams. I don't know if Toxic realized that when he was drafting him, but it's usually not a good thing to have multiple receivers or weapons on the same offense unless it's a quarterback and like a receiver. Usually it's a bad idea because you think about it, they're going to be stealing targets from each other. That's pretty much it. That's usually not a good thing when it comes to fantasy, so I'm not too big of a fan of Myers this year. Plus, they got Hunter Renfrow over there who will probably be taking up a good number of targets. Then you got Courtland Sutton. I think he'll be pretty good to start out the season, but upon Jerry Jeudy coming back, and I think Mims might have a good chance. Mims is their rookie receiver, in case you don't know. He might have a good chance of stepping up and doing really good, and maybe actually becoming really good in terms of fantasy. It just depends on how good he ends up doing. I don't think Sutton will actually do that great after that, but for a wide receiver 4, I guess he's solid. Then you got Michael Gallup. He's actually their wide receiver 3 because they got Brandon Cooks. We'll talk about him with a later team who has him. I think Michael Gallup's not going to be very fantasy reliable this year. I highly doubt Dallas is going to use him that much. They did lose Dalton Schultz, but gaining Cooks, I think Gallup's is going to kind of get buried in the roster here. Not get that many targets compared to years past. McCole Hardman, same situation. He's on the Jets. There's so many weapons between Cook, Gardner, Wilson. There's so many other people. I don't see Hardman being that great, and even on games he does do great, I wouldn't say it's consistent enough to ever start him. Now, I will admit I don't know too much about Reed from the Packers, but I have a feeling he's going to be in the same situation where he might have upside, but he has both Romeo Doubs and Christian Watson ahead of him on the depth chart, and they just drafted both those players. I think they intend on using them. They did very well last year. However, he is using a dog shit quarterback, in the quarterback video. I don't like Jordan Love. I don't like the situation. I think they're going to be running the ball a lot more, checking it down to Aaron Jones a lot more this year. So I'm really not a fan of this receiving core overall. You got a lot of them. That's about the best I can say. I like Davante Adams, but past that, I'm not a fan of this receiving core. Coming in at number 10, I have Milf. Of course, good old Milf. Now, his receivers consist of DK Metcalf, Jerry Jeudy, Brandon Cooks, OBJ, Rashad Bateman. I think that's about it. Yeah, he has DK Metcalf, Brandon Cooks, OBJ, Jerry Jeudy, and Rashad Bateman. Yeah, that's it. All right, just wanted to make sure. So I like DK Metcalf. He's a very good receiver. I don't think he's a receiver 1. He'd be a very good receiver 2, though. I think he's pretty good overall. I think he'll have another good year like he usually does. Brandon Cooks, I think even though for a wide receiver 2, that is not a good player to have as a wide receiver 2. Don't get me wrong, in the slightest. But I do think he'll do way better than people are expecting him to do. He's a deep threat receiver. He's always been known to be a deep threat receiver. Getting a guy like Dak Prescott, it's a perfect scheme fit for him. I think he'll do really good compared to how people are expecting him to do. But using him as your expected wide receiver 2, I don't think you're going to like the results of that. Milf. Rashad Bateman and OBJ, you can see by their projections and the fact that you have one starting and one benched, I don't think you can rely on either of them to actually start. They might have okay weeks, you know what I mean? Even though Baltimore, I said in the previous video, is going to a pass-heavy offense, I don't think that any of the receivers are capable of full-on starting. There's so many guys. They just drafted Zay Flowers. They picked up OBJ. They have Bateman, as you see here. On top of that, they got Devin Duvernay. They have Mark Andrews. There's so many places for this ball to go around. That's not even talking about the two-header running backs they have and not talking about Lamar Jackson scrambling on every other play. There's just so many places for this ball to go. It's going to be very, very hard to trust one receiver from this offense. I do like Jerry Jeudy. Jerry Jeudy, I think, will be pretty good whenever he comes back. I think he might actually be doing a lot better than he did last year. I think he'll have a very good year. I think you'll like Jerry Jeudy. So I guess I kind of take back what I said about Brandon Cooks. I didn't realize you had Jerry Jeudy on your bench. But overall, it's still the tier of the rankings still stay the same, though. Jerry Jeudy, I think he'll be pretty good, but overall, I don't think he'll be a great wide receiver 2, but I think he'll do better than he did last year at least. Plus, you got the stack with Wilson there. That's it for Johnny. Moving into number 9, we got Pussy. And right around this range is where there's like 4 or 5 receiving cores in a row that I could switch in and out with each other. Like, this is where it got hard to rank them. This is where a lot of teams have good to great receiving cores, and it's just very close. But he has Tyreek Hill. I think Tyreek Hill is one of the best receivers you can have in the league this year. One of my favorite options. Not only will he possibly have Tua for a whole year this year, I think this is his retirement year. He might be going all out. So I could see Tyreek Hill having a phenomenal season. I think he'll be great for you. Keenan Allen at a receiver 2. People are hyping him up to be really good again now that he's coming back. I'm not a fan. In the same way, I'm not a fan of Mike Williams. Not only did they bring in Quentin Johnston, but Mike Williams and Keenan Allen both are injury-prone to hell and back. Keenan Allen has been on a downgrade for the past few years now, even when he does stay healthy. I just don't see Keenan Allen working out as good as people might be expecting him to do. I think he's solid as a flex guy. Maybe he'll occasionally have his good game. I don't think he'll do nearly as good as people are expecting him to do. But we'll see. We got Michael Thomas, who I think will be a good flex. I think he'll hold his own at flex. I think he could have some good wide receiver upside depending on the situation. However, it looks like between Jamal Williams and Alvin Kamara coming back week 4 and the multiple tight ends they keep signing, I have a feeling this is going to be a run-heavy offense more than it is a pass-heavy. So I think there might be a limited upside, but overall, Thomas should be solid for a flex. Rashee Rice, you kind of got the short end of the stick on that. I was actually a big Rashee Rice fan watching him in the preseason. Unfortunately, he did really bad in his last game, and he ended up getting put onto the bench position for the Chiefs roster. I think he might be one of the best receivers they have, but for right now, I can't really rank it too much higher based on Rashee Rice, though. Maybe if he starts later in the season and blows up, he might move up the list. Like I said, a lot of these teams are very close here, so I could see them moving later in the rankings. Rondale Moore, and I know I gave you shit for trying to make trades with Rondale Moore. I will say this, he is very underrated compared to where he is going. I think he will have a much better year than people are expecting, especially for him not going drafted in a lot of leagues. Once Kyler Murray comes back, I think he'll actually be not a good wide receiver to start, but I think if you need someone to go in, I think he can get the job done pretty consistently, especially with them only having Marquise Brown to throw the ball to for the most part. I think it's a solid player overall. Coming in at number 8, we got Rick Tatership. Now, Rick Tatership has CeeDee Lamb, Christian Watson, Drake London, Marquise Brown, Treylon Burks, and that's it. Okay, so I love CeeDee Lamb. He's one of my most drafted players these past few years. He's been phenomenal. He's only getting better. I think with Dallas losing Ezekiel Elliott, they might be passing the ball more. It's very possible. I think CeeDee Lamb will probably get better as he keeps going because he's a young player. I think he's going on 24, 25, if I'm not mistaken. I think he's looking very good. But here's where your receivers start to drop off a little bit. Christian Watson is a phenomenal receiver. I picked him off free agency last year. He almost helped me win a championship. It was phenomenal. But he doesn't have Aaron Rodgers slinging the ball to him anymore. He has competition with Romeo Doubs and the other guy, Toxic Zenpai had, Jalen Reed. I think they're going to be a lot more run-heavy, and even if Jordan Love does good, which is a huge gamble, I'm personally not a fan of him. I think him as a receiver, too, won't pan out that well just because of the sheer amount of competition he has and the lack of an offense overall. And it's kind of the same issue with Drake London here. He has a terrible quarterback in Desmond Ridder. I don't see him doing too good. Their offense is terrible overall. They got Bijan Robinson. Everybody's hyping him up. Whether he does as good or not, I don't think it will really help Drake London that much. Marquise Brown is actually kind of like I said about Rondale Moore. Once Kyler Murray comes back, I could see Marquise Brown being phenomenal for you at your wide receiver 4 here. Maybe even better than Drake London and Chris Watson as the season goes on. I don't know if anybody remembers, back before DeAndre Hopkins got unsuspended last year, Marquise Brown was one of the highest scoring receivers in the entire league. Now, is the scenario the same as it was last year? Not quite, but he still does have that upside. I think he could be one of the best receivers in the league if they don't go and pick up another receiver or anything like that. I could see Marquise Brown doing very good. Treylon Burks is a backup. It's a solid backup to have. That's a pretty good backup, especially going into your 5th receiver. I'm not a fan of them just because they got D-Hop. They have Henry, so they're probably going to be run-heavy. Their offensive line might be the worst in the league. They don't know what they're doing for sure with their quarterback situation in Tannehill. Overall, he's not a player to look excited for, but for where you have him on your bench, it is very good. And it's crazy to think you're only ranked number 8. Like I said, these receivers and these lists were actually pretty hard to make. There's so many good receivers this year in fantasy. Coming in at number 7, we have Gotham Troublemakers. He has Cooper Kupp, T. Higgins, Juju Smith-Schuster, Zay Flowers, Adam Thielen, Isaiah Hodgins as his receivers. Let's start up top with Cooper Kupp. Kupp could finish with the upside of, say, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson. He absolutely could. But there are so many factors that need to go into his favor that I don't think it's realistic, and I could see him getting hurt again by week 10. Even probably by week 5. He's just like Tua in the quarterback video. He needs Matthew Stafford to stay healthy. He needs to stay healthy, and he needs that O-line to actually protect something, unlike Obama's immigration policies. So that's the thing. That you need so much to go in your favor for this to go through, and I just think it's not going to work with Kupp to begin with. He has so many injuries. He hasn't been able to stay healthy. He's going in his 30s. I don't think Kupp's going to be that great of a pick overall, but he technically has the upside, which is why you're as high as you are. Plus, I love T. Higgins. I think he's one of the best receiver 2s in the league. I think if you're looking at the top 12 receivers in the league as your wide receiver 1, and then T. Higgins right there at 13, I think he's the best wide receiver 2 you can possibly have. Maybe the worst wide receiver 1 you could have. He's very good. I love T. Higgins. He always has that upside with Joe Burrow, especially if Chase gets hurt. Juju Smith-Schuster is going to New England here. I think they're going to be a run-heavy offense 90% of the time. I don't think Mac Jones is going to be doing anything special for Juju. With that being said, I think he has a high floor, meaning I don't think he'll do bad per se, but I don't think he'll do anything special over there in New England. I think he'll just be a holdover player. You got Zay Flowers here. It's the same thing I was saying about Rashad Bateman, about Duvernay, about OBJ. There's so many weapons over in Baltimore. I can't trust putting a guy like Zay Flowers in. Even if he turns into prime Megatron, I have a feeling they're still not going to pass the ball to him more than 20% of the time, or more than, I just can't see it. I don't think they're going to be using any of these receivers in particular much. Lamar is kind of just going to be like, fuck it, this guy down there somewhere overall, so I don't think it's going to be that great. Adam Thielen, on the opposite hand, it's going to be Bryce Young not having any other receivers to throw the ball to. Sure, they have Mingo. I'm not too big on him, though. They have DJ Chark, who's getting hurt already. But it's the same thing, though. They have nobody to throw the ball to. They have Miles Sanders. I think he'll be very good with the run game. But overall, throwing the ball to the receiving core and tight end, there's just no one. So it might be the opposite end of the spectrum where they say, fuck it, Thielen's down there somewhere, and that's about it. So I think you actually have some upside down there with Thielen. I could see you end up starting him over Juju at some point throughout the year, but we'll have to wait and see as that goes on. We have Isaiah Hodgins. I'm not a fan of any receivers coming from the Giants for the same reason as the Ravens. You got a scrambling quarterback, a team with an elite tight end, a team with a whole bunch of other receivers of similar value. You have good running back, with Saquon Barkley, with the checkdowns and the runs. I just don't see them using Hodgins enough to be consistent, but for a backup, I guess it's not bad. I think his projections might be a little high there, but we'll wait and see as we go on. And here's the thing, we're only at 7, so we're getting to the middle of the pack. This is not a bad receiving core at all. This is about middle of the pack. Coming in at number 6, we got Booty Basher. And I know a lot of people, before we even look at these receivers, are going to think, how the hell did Booty get this high? Well, he has a lot of good receivers. He doesn't have many elite ones, but he has a lot of good ones. I was saying in the quarterback video, or in the running backs video, I think the 49ers are going to be passing the ball a hell of a lot more than they have in years past. I could see them throwing to Deebo a lot more. The problem is they have so many places to share this ball around, to Kittle, to Ayuk, to McCaffrey, to Mitchell. They have so many places to send this ball. So I don't think Samuel would be a good wide receiver 1 at all. Maybe a good wide receiver 2, but you're kind of pushing it even there. I like DeAndre Hopkins. He's been my favorite receiver in the league. I always argued he was the best receiver in the league for years to come. But the Titans have the worst offensive line in the league. I've said that probably 35 times in these videos now. I just can't see that working out too well. He might do pretty good. I think that's why I ranked you so high, at least. I think I might have given you some extra brownie points for Hopkins, but the main reason you're this high, though, overall, is your good depth at receiver, where you have George Pickens, who I think is going to have a phenomenal year compared to how he's been in years past. The Steelers are going to go from a run-heavy offense to more passing, better quarterback play maybe, better offensive line play. I think Pickens might actually step up and beat Deontay Johnson in terms of this receiving core and how good they're doing. So I think that's a very good wide receiver 3. And Gabe Davis, being on the same team as Josh Allen, is going to give you wide receiver 2 status pretty much on the spot. So if Gabe Davis can do what he's done in years past, I know he's been a bit disappointing, but he doesn't have to do great. You have him as a wide receiver 4. If he can so much as be somewhat up to par from what people are expecting him to be, he could easily be a phenomenal fantasy option for a wide receiver 2, 3, especially 4. That's really good. You have Sky Moore, who has a lot of upside with the Chiefs. I don't think he'll do that great. I think they're going to lean towards Tony and eventually Rice, even though they're not doing it yet. But overall, I think he has the high upside that could warrant him being a wide receiver 5. You also have Romeo Doubs, who for the same reason as Chris Watson, I'm not a fan of him, even though he's a great player. Terrible quarterback play. So many weapons to throw this ball to. As a wide receiver 6, though, can't really complain. It's just kind of more to add to the greatness of your roster here with receivers. Coming in at number 5, we got J-Bay. Now, here he has Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jalen Waddle, so already 2 borderline wide receiver 1s. I think they're both kind of more in the wide receiver 2 range, but they're still both very good. He has Deontay Johnson, who's kind of on the flip side of George Pickens, Elijah Moore, Marvin Mims, and that is it. So I think Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jalen Waddle both have the upside to finish as top 12 wide receivers, especially if guys like Cooper Kupp, Jamar Chase get hurt. It's very possible. But they also deal with injuries themselves. As you can see, you already have both of them who are questionable, not even starting the season out. Overall, I think they're very good receivers to have. One of the best duos in the league, which is why you're ranked so high here. Deontay Johnson, even if George Pickens does outplay him and outcatch the snaps on him, I do think he'll have a way better year than he's had in years past. Not only will the passing game in general be better, and Pickett will be passing the ball more overall, I do think there is one statistic that people don't even realize, and that's the fact that Deontay Johnson had a lot of catches over the past few years, but he barely caught any touchdowns at all, and it's kind of like a little background fact that nobody talks about. So if Deontay Johnson is able to start getting touchdowns, he could easily just skyrocket it in terms of being a receiver. I think he could be very good, but it's just a matter of if he gets those touchdowns. Next up, he had Elijah Moore. Elijah Moore is kind of a coin flip. I could see him doing really good, doing really bad over in Cleveland. I don't think it'll hurt Amari Cooper too much. I think it's just going to kind of help Cleveland have a better offense overall. I don't really know what's going to happen with Moore. He could be really good. He could just get like an okay 10 few points a game. He could do really bad. Time can only tell. There's not really a good way to predict it. It kind of depends on Deshaun Watson more than anyone. Maybe if Elijah Moore has a hotter girlfriend to rape or something, I don't know. Next up, we got Marvin Mims. And it's like I was saying earlier, especially with Jeudy being out, I could see him stepping up and doing really good. He has his shot right here to step up and do really good. Now with this being said, if he doesn't do great before Jeudy comes back, he's probably going to be just cuttable off your roster at that point. But if he does step in and do really good these starting weeks, he could be one of the best receivers in fantasy by the end of the year for all we know. But until that happens, it's like a big do or die for these first few weeks here. But overall, you got a pretty good roster here at number 5, J-Bay. Next up, coming at number 4, we got PMC Wagner. He has Devontae Smith, DJ Moore, Brandon Ayuk, Mike Evans, Kadarius Toney, Jackson Smith-Njigba, and Zay Jones. Now, the main reason you're this high isn't because you have any like flashy receivers or number 1 receivers or anything. You just have good, solid, consistent receivers out the ass. That's the main reason you're number 4. There's so many slots to fill, and you have that many good, solid receivers that'll hold you over. I think you're warranted to be in the top third of this list. But anyway, Devontae Smith, I think he's a pretty good wide receiver too. He's kind of right there with Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jalen Waddle and Jalen's on J-Bay's list. I think he'll be like the borderline wide receiver 2, wide receiver 1, along with guys like T. Higgins and those guys I just said. DJ Moore is a Bears fan. I don't think he's going to do as good as people are expecting him to do just because of that horrible Chicago offensive line. Fields has a tendency to scramble. We have 37 running backs, like I said. Who knows? Heaven forbid we start using Cole Kmet. Overall, I don't think he's going to be a great wide receiver 2, but for a flex spot or something like that, he would be phenomenal. I think he'll have an overall solid year either way. I think he has a high floor. Worst case scenario, he doesn't do as good as people are expecting, but overall, should still do good. Brandon Ayuk has the problem of so many targets to throw the ball to with the 49ers, but at least they'll be passing the ball more. Now, here's the thing. I like Brandon Ayuk here in this situation compared to in Booty Basher's situation because Brandon Ayuk is being used as a flex spot wide receiver. You know what I mean? In comparison to Deebo Samuel being the best receiver on your team. The 49ers have receivers that all will probably do consistently good for you, but none of them will step out and have phenomenal weeks, I don't think. So for a flex spot, Brandon Ayuk is actually a pretty solid player, and it's the same thing with Mike Evans. Even though his quarterback play is terrible, I don't think Mike Evans has ever finished a season under 1,000 yards total. He's done really good overall. I think Baker Mayfield's actually going to throw the ball a hell of a lot more than people are expecting, and I don't think that's a good thing in terms of fantasy as a quarterback perspective. But for receivers in a PPR league, I think Mike Evans and Chris Godwin are very good and underestimated players this year. Kadarius Toney, like I was saying earlier, I think could actually be a phenomenal player if he ends up being kind of like Kelsey's always been a deep threat player. If Mahomes can make it work with Toney, I could see Toney being a phenomenal player to go and put in later in the season. But it comes down to who ends up being the main guy, Sky Moore, Sky Moore, I'm forgetting his name now. Rashee Rice, it could come down to them. Overall, Kadarius Toney has the upside. I like Jackson Smith-Njigba. Like I said, I think he's going to start slowly eating away at Tyler Lockett's catches and targets. I think he's going to take over for the Seahawks for the most part. Tyler Lockett's getting real old now. Smith-Njigba, he was one of the best receivers in the draft. I think he could end up replacing him by the end of the year. I think that's going to be a pretty good pick for you. Zay Jones, he's a receiver that it's hard to say with the sheer amount I'm expecting Jacksonville to pass the ball. I think he'll be at least okay. But I think he does have upside if, say, Calvin Ridley or Christian Kirk got hurt. He could easily just be plugged in right there on the spot and probably put up a good 15, 20 points that week. I don't know if anybody remembers how good these receivers were for Jacksonville last year without Calvin Ridley. So, yeah, if in the scenario where one of those receivers got hurt, yeah, I could see Zay Jones having a really good week. Other than that, I wouldn't really trust starting him unless a scenario like that happens. But overall, it's a really good receiving core, number 4. Coming in at number 3, we have Big Yawners. Big Yawners has Justin Jefferson. That's a pretty damn good start. Best receiver in the league probably. It's kind of like the whole Travis Kelce compared to the rest of the tight ends position where there's just such a big drop-off between him and most of the rest of the receivers. But Justin Jefferson overall is probably the best pick you could have made. Phenomenal number 1 receiver. Best thing you could have. Amari Cooper's a really good wide receiver too. I think he's probably going to finish as one of the low-end wide receiver 2s, but overall he's still pretty good. If Deshaun Watson, I think he won't be affected too badly by Elijah Moore getting there. Overall, I think Deshaun Watson will be spreading the ball around a lot. I think they'll be getting a lot more passing yards than they did last year at least. So I think Cooper will still be fine. Then you have Christian Kirk, who will be a really good wide receiver too for Jacksonville. Last year he did phenomenal because he was the number 1 receiver, And I forgot to mention this in the quarterback video. The reason I have Lawrence so high is Christian Kirk, people forget, was a wide receiver 3 over in Arizona for years and then just went over to Jacksonville, and Lawrence was able to make it work. He was like, screw it, you're going to become a number 1 fantasy option. Christian Kirk was phenomenal last year, but I do think Ridley coming in is going to start taking a lot of his targets away as the number 1 receiver. But overall, Christian Kirk for the flex spot is pretty damn good, I got to admit. Now, Jordan Addison for a bench spot, phenomenal. I truly do think he's going to end up being the next T. Higgins in the sense of he's not going to be the number 1 receiver on the team, but I think he'll have capabilities of being really consistent and really productive in terms of fantasy. Plus, they just lost Dalvin Cook. The only problem is they might have Hawkinson taking away targets, but overall, I think he could still be like the T. Higgins, maybe a bit worse than T. Higgins in terms of fantasy. But that's just my personal opinion. I think he's pretty good to have on the bench overall. Here's where you have a bunch of guys where I think you just kind of have them in case you need them. Allen Lazard, I think, is very limited on his upside due to Garrett Wilson, but at least he has Rodgers, I guess. I don't think he'll do that phenomenal or that bad. He's just kind of okay. Tyler Boyd, even if Jamar Chase or T. Higgins gets hurt, is so inconsistent when it comes to fantasy. He can go from, having 0 points to having 300 points, and a set of hotels built Monopoly, and getting a king in checkers, The dude could do everything in a matter of a week, and then you start him again, and he'll play like shit. He's done that his whole career, except for when he was younger. Donovan Peoples-Jones, he'll be a receiver 3 for Cleveland. I don't think he'll do that great, but for where you have him on your depth chart, having this many receivers is part of the reason you're up here. It's not bad, but overall he's not like anything you should be looking too forward to overall. But I think he'll still be okay, especially for where you have him. He's probably way better than the people who will get on free agency. But yeah, overall, I have you at number 3. Coming in at number 2, I think these are the truly elite receiving cores. Like, between me and number 2, well, I guess I just told you who's number 2, but between number 2 and number 1, it was so hard for me to pick one between the two. I just said screw it. You could compare number 1 and 2, and I think they'd be very arguable for number 1 and 2. It's hard to say, but I personally picked Karen's husband at number 2, and this is where the receiving cores are just stupid good. I think you have Stephon Diggs, who I think is the most consistent receiver out of the first round, other than Justin Jefferson, that you could have got. He might not finish as the best one, but most consistent, I think. I don't see him really getting hurt or having to deal with many injuries unless something stupid happens. He has Josh Allen as a quarterback, elite situation, probably one of the best wide receiver ones you can have. Chris Olave, I do think he's a little bit overrated this year, especially I've seen him go in the second, third, fourth round in fantasy. I don't think he should be going that high, but overall he's still a really good player, would be a very good flex spot player, okay wide receiver too. Derek Carr, like I said, it's going to be a more run-heavy offense in my opinion, but Olave is still a solid wide receiver too overall. You have Calvin Ridley, who I think might finish the year as a top 12 wide receiver. People forget how good Calvin Ridley was just a few years ago before he got fined and suspended for gambling, But overall, I think he could still finish as one of the top 12 wide receivers in the league. He has the upside to do it, absolutely. It's just a matter of if he pulls the trigger on it. Terry McLaurin, he's one of my favorite receivers in the entire league, but he has a horrible quarterback throwing to him, Sam Howell. You may as well go to a strip club and grab someone from there. They'll probably be a better quarterback than Sam Howell, But overall, I'm not a fan. Then we got, I am a fan of McLaurin, but I'm just not a fan of his situation. But for how deep he is on the roster, he's very good for how deep he is on the roster. But overall, I think his quarterback situation is going to limit him severely. Coming in next, we have Michael Pittman. I think this might actually be a very good year for Michael Pittman, and not just because he's the wide receiver 5 on your team, God forbid, but it's because he has, I think, the best quarterback he's ever had. Think about who he's had. He has had Phillip Rivers after he had 35 kids. He's had Matt Ryan, who I think probably works at the fast food McDonald's or something, I don't know, but he was terrible when he was in Indianapolis. Who else did he have? Carson Wentz. There's just not been a quarterback that's been okay for him yet. Anthony Richardson, all he has to do is be okay, and Michael Pittman would probably blow up this year. I could see him being phenomenal. That's a very good wide receiver 5 to have. Plus, they're losing Taylor, so they're going to be passing the ball more, I believe. And then you have Nico Collins. I'm not too big on Nico Collins, but, he does have upside. Maybe C.J. Stroud really likes him. I don't know. I don't think he's going to be anything special, anything startable this season, but for depth, for how many receivers you have, it's pretty good. Kind of like the Darth situation where he's not great, but for where you have him, can't really complain. Very good option overall. I don't see him doing that great because that Texans offense is bad overall, and C.J. Stroud has an IQ of -4, so we'll see how that goes. Number 1, I actually have myself here. Like I said, I think number 1 and 2 could be interexchanged. I have Ja'Marr Chase, Garrett Wilson, Chris Godwin, Jahan Dotson, Quentin Johnson, and Jameson Williams. I think Ja'Marr Chase is going to finish as the receiver 2 if he can stay healthy. He kind of has Cooper Kupp syndrome where he needs to stay healthy to have that good of a season. I have a very good hunch on it this year that he'll actually stay healthy. It's just a hunch. Don't take that with a grain of salt or anything. I don't think Joe Burrow is going to have to worry about many injuries. I think he'll be fine. Overall, I'm looking very excited for Ja'Marr Chase this year. Garrett Wilson would have been a really good wide receiver too when he had Zach Wilson, the MILF smasher, and where he had Zach Wilson and he had, I don't even remember the guy's name, Mike White throwing to him all season. He was still putting up crazy numbers with Corey Davis competing for his target share and multiple running backs in the backfield. Think about what he'll do with Aaron Rodgers. Okay, Garrett Wilson was ranking above people like OBJ, Justin Jefferson, ranked among these people with rookie prospects when it comes to receivers. I think he could be a wide receiver 1 in fantasy. Hell, he could be the next Justin Jefferson for all we know. Now, I don't think he's going to be that good, not yet at least, but it's very possible, and I think his upside alone warrants a very good receiver too. Chris Godwin is going to Tampa Bay, and it's kind of like what I said with Mike Evans. I think Baker Mayfield's going to be slinging the ball around left and right. I think he's going to be kind of like Jameis Winston that one year where he threw 30 touchdowns, 30 interceptions. So Baker Mayfield might not be great in terms of fantasy, but if he's putting up like 400 yards a game, that could be phenomenal for PPR guys, kind of like Chris Godwin, kind of like Mike Evans. Godwin's always been the shorter check down, short route kind of guy, so I think Baker's going to use him a lot more, and I think Godwin's going to be a very good wide receiver to have in fantasy this year. Jahan Dotson, I think if he had a quarterback not named Sam Howell, he could be a wide receiver too this year, maybe better. Kind of just like the Garrett Wilson situation where, heck, if Aaron Rodgers decided to go to Washington, I think people would be drafting Jahan Dotson where they're drafting Garrett Wilson, where he's a young player, he's getting better every year. He has the upside, but the quarterback situation is really holding him down. But I think I would be happy starting him at any point because think about it this way. Even with that being said, kind of like Garrett Wilson, he had shitty quarterbacks even last year, so I don't think he's going to be affected that bad by Sam Howell being bad. Heck, maybe Sam Howell ends up being okay, and if Sam Howell is okay, I basically hit the lottery with Jahan Dotson, I think. Next up, I have Quentin Johnston. I think he's going to come in. I think his status will entirely rely on if the Chargers' entire receiving corps decides to go to the nursing home again like they did last year. I don't know for sure if that's going to happen. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a sightseer, but it's a very realistic possibility where at least one of them get hurt. If one of them do get hurt, I think Quentin Johnston with Justin Herbert at quarterback will be a very good fantasy option to have with how good of that upside could be. I think it's a very good spot to have on the bench. And then Jameson Williams, I'm not as high on him as a lot of people were. I think his projections are stupid high. I don't think he'll produce nearly as well as people are saying he's going to. Plus, he's out for a few weeks. But for where I got him in the draft, very last pick, I think he's very good as a wide receiver. What is that? Wide receiver 6. I think it's probably the best wide receiver 6 in the fantasy league. Like I said, I'm not really basing these lists too much on the backups. But overall, I think he might be one of the best backups in the league that could potentially be a starter. But overall, I hope you guys enjoyed this list. I'll make a tight end one maybe tonight just because it's so quick. I might be busy later, but it depends. We'll have to see. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Let me know if you guys wanted more jokes, more depth on it. I tried to take my time with everyone on this video, try to talk everyone over more than the last video so people could have a better understanding of why I'm ranking people in certain positions. I tried to be better with that. I tried to throw in a few extra jokes, but overall, this was a pretty good video, I think. It took me a minute to make, but the next one should be shorter. There's just like a million receivers per roster. Anyway, I hope you